Good morning. This is Jason Dean back at it again. I decided to do two videos today. I put out one that was a little bit funny and sad, so I figured I wanted to do one that was a feel-good movie. Not exactly. So, and I just saw this movie for the first time last night, and I was so uh, fucking blown away by it. To put it honest, to be as honest as I can be. Never seen this movie before, and that is this film here, Hunting Ground, directed by Jordi Guru, who is a Spanish director who's been around for many, many years. This movie came out in 1983. He's a very well known director. I was familiar with some of his films. He's responsible for a lot of horror classics. A few of those are Blood Ceremony, Let the Sleeping Corpses Lie, and Hunting Ground. I do believe I did see Blood Ceremony, and that is a really amazing movie. Super raw and kind of horrific horror movie in the exploitation world. This movie is definitely an exploitation movie. Like this movie, I like I said in the beginning of the show, like I was kind of dumbfounded by how amazing this film was, and this is part of Mondo Macabre. If you can see the label there, I've talked a lot about Mondo Macabre. This is the back of the disc here. Um, I've talked a lot about Mondo Macabre before, and I've done a lot of shows on their videos, on their Blu-rays. I've bought quite a few of their movies on on the label on their label, and they just have like an amazing assortment of movies. Like everything I've gotten from them has all been movies I've never seen before. I've all I just bought them on a whim because I know I a couple of years ago I bought a couple of films that were on Mono Macabre. The that Paul Naschy movie that I did a show on, The Howl of the Devil. That was, I think, that might have been one of my first Mono Macabre movies that I bought, and I really loved that movie. That was my introduction to the great Paul Naschy. Also, a very famous Spanish actor, director, producer, writer, an iconic figure in the world of horror exploitation. So since then, I've been buying, everything that I see that has a Mono Macabre label. I've been buying them, and I've just been blown away by the quality and the amount of diversity that they have on their in their whole entire roster. The one obvious commonality is that they're all these like super uber low budget, really obscure exploitation movies, and they're just so awesome. But they're all over the place. They're stylistically there's like the giallo thing going on. There's like some films that are definitely like more horror based. There's also um, the sex exploitation thing going on. Um, and this film is like kind of a drama too. I mean, it's definitely it's a the acting and the writing for this film is so good. Um, this film too is kind of considered to be like a little bit more of a higher budget film in that in that realm of exploitation. Jorge Gro, who was the director of this, there's a and again, like I said, he's most well known for those other those other movies, Blood Ceremony and Let the Sleeping Corpses Lie. Those films are probably two of his most like successful movies. I have seen Blood Ceremony, and it really is an amazing movie. I don't own it, unfortunately. I do need to buy that thing, but again, it's one of those things. I didn't realize that this was directed by Jorge Grav, and this is a Spanish film, and it's awesome because you do like. And again, I've talked about it before. I've been buying a lot of foreign films, and most of the films on Mondo Macabre are all foreign films, which has been awesome. I've always been a fan of foreign films, and the thing that's so awesome is that you have the option to watch it in the like the English dubbed version, but then also in its native language. So I was able to watch this, and I watched this for the first time last night. I Yeah, I was totally blown away, and a great way to kind of end the chaotic night of what where like I just talked about in my last video, where my VHS player and my surround sound system completely died, and then my copy of The Thing died, and just yeah. And then I was totally set in watching The Thing. I was like thinking about it all day. This was a movie I bought a few weeks ago, and I hadn't seen it yet. I'd gotten through the other pile of movies that I watched, but this one I was just kind of keeping on reserve. I was going to watch it, but I wasn't like in the mood for really anything else but The Thing. And then I was like, okay, I'll put this in since nothing's working right now. I'll put this in, and within 5 minutes, I was just like glued to the screen. It's a really interesting story because the general scenario of it, and it stars um, Assumpta Surma, Victor Yalverdes, Louis Hastashi, Jose Sacristacon, and Palamo Loreno. Pardon my bad Spanish pronunciations here, but I was like again I was in a John Carpenter The Thing state of mind all day. I was thinking about it. I was in a mood for good sci-fi horror movie. So then everything else failed, and I put this in, and then within 5 minutes I was just totally hooked to this, and I was just glued to the screen. And this story is so interesting because it's centered around this main character who's played by Assumpta Serna, who is a criminal defense attorney. And she basically, her job is to defend people who are brought up on charges for murder and all kinds of criminal acts. And she's like a public defender. And she really has this, her whole character has this real strong focus on what real justice is and what punishment is. And she has this tragedy happen in her life where her house gets robbed, and her husband, and they're actually held captive, and her husband gets shot and killed, which is just a gruesome scene. And but the actual killing was unintentional. So the whole story is centered on, well, these guys are eventually caught, and she has to still like try to maintain her strong position, in that violence isn't really the answer to counter other violence, and that the court needs to be that ruler, and there needs to be um, a real emphasis on the ethic of like civil justice. So she maintains that law, like this hard stance, and she actually, you know, does not push for the man who is responsible for her husband's death. Does not push for him to be killed or be, you know, to be pushed into the situation where he's going to be on death row. She defends that even in such an extreme situation. She really defends her position on that. She doesn't feel that the killing of him would bring her husband back or justify anything. she thinks it would just make it worse. And she has this real strong moral compass. And it's really interesting because she faces all of this backlash from friends and family about her position and not being, you know, not being filled with rage and vengeance on this man who killed her husband, who was a criminal and did do incredibly horrible acts, but was not really intentionally set on killing him. It was kind of an accident, even though it was like a horrible situation, very complicated. So she throughout this movie, she basically is put into the situation of where pressure, all kinds of pressure from her family and her friends about how can she still ride this line and not just be filled with hate and not just be filled with vengeance. And it's really interesting. It's really interesting. But then, without giving this movie away, there's a series of events where her family is now in this brought back into a horrible situation, which is actually even worse than the previous situation, and it becomes a matter of life and death. And so they're put in these horrible situation, this like worst case scenario. The family over time again is put into this situation, and it is unbelievable. Like the last 20 minutes of this movie are just some of the most brutal, vicious scenes I've ever seen in a movie. Just unbelievable. It just, it. I've seen some reviews and discussions about this movie because I had never seen this movie before, and they've kind of just compared it a little bit to like Last House on the Left, which I definitely see similarities. But it's in some ways it's like a next level of an exploration to a degree of exploration of like kind of the ethics around the criminal system, but then somebody experiencing real violence and real sexual violence in their lives, and how that person will react, and how what they could do, or what they could be capable of doing to save themselves and their loved ones. The other movie that this really reminded me of was, which is such an awesome movie, is the original Straw Dogs with Dustin Hoffman. Like that movie is just brutal and just like amazing, just an amazing film. Sam Peckinpah directed that movie. Just such an awesome movie. I eventually want to buy that movie. I need to buy it, but it reminded me very much of Straw Dogs. But yet it's totally its own thing because it has this real interesting narrative of this central character, who's this woman who is this public defender, and she has this real like high kind of you know sense of like having this ethical or like moral compass in the criminal justice system, and tries to almost separate herself, her personal life, from what the law of the land is to a degree. But so it really focuses on that. But the violence and the rape scenes in this movie are just horrendous and brutal as all hell. And the ending, and it was really interesting because like this movie, there is like it's about an hour and 48 minutes. For a lot of these like exploitation movies, and I definitely consider this to be an exploitation movie. I mean, because it's super gritty, it's so raw, it's so low down and nasty. And like again, like I said, the violence, the sexual violence is just really like, just really intense. Really pushes the boundaries and the intensity around it. But essentially, it's like the movie starts off with this introduction to this family and the main character, and then these events happen that are really like insane and brutal, and then after that there's a whole kind of emphasis on kind of exploring how she is like dealing with this trauma and dealing with the pressure from her family and trying to still like be in the middle. Um, and the whole film is kind of focused on that. Like there isn't violence or gore throughout the entire film. And it was interesting because it got to a place of where I looked at the time, and this movie is a little bit. Most like exploitation movies are, they tend to be on the shorter side. Like they tend to be an hour and 20 minutes, an hour and a half at the most. Some of them are even shorter, like an hour and 10 minutes. Most exploitation movies I've found are like, a longer film is about an hour and a half. This is an hour and 48 minutes, so it's a little bit longer. And when it got to the point of where it was kind of approaching the third act, and I looked at the time, and I'm like, I was really curious as to where this was going to go because it was like there was all this tension building to where it was moving into this darker direction, and I was like, wow, where the hell is this movie going to go? And then I looked at the time and I realized, wait, it's only got 10 more minutes in this film, and I'm like, what the hell's going to happen in 10 minutes? And then it was just like a freaking grenade goes off, and then I was just like, what? And so much happens in the last like 10 to 15 minutes of this movie. It's just like jaw dropping. Um, and it's got one of the greatest endings ever that I've seen in a film. But there's so much tension. There's so much emphasis on the characters, and particularly around the main character, this woman, and but the acting is just is just fabulous. The story is just incredible. Um, and the other thing too that I found is that I really cared about all of the characters on the screen, including the monsters, these guys that are the criminals that are responsible for this horrible thing. They're all so fleshed out character wise that the writing is so great, the direction is amazing. But I noticed that I had some kind of like sympathy or empathy towards all of the characters. Like I actually cared about what all of them were doing, and where their characters could end up. That hasn't happened in a while. I was just like totally drawn to all of the characters that were being introduced and that were you were following them on in this movie. It was pretty amazing. Like, and at the same time, it being an exploitation movie where it's like it's super raw and gritty, um, and super low budget, um, and it delivers definitely on that front. And it's brutal, like I said, it's one of the most brutal movies I've ever seen. Like the ending is just like shocking as all hell. No, I did not see it coming at all. When it hit the last 10 or 12 minutes, I was floored. I was just like, whoa. But the thing that's so great about this film is that it's really kind of a cool character study, but then there's all of this tension building and building and building, and before you know it, you're so into the film, you're so invested, and you're like, where the hell is this movie going to go? And it went into directions that I did not expect, and it didn't go. Like initially, I would have thought that this film would have been a thing of where, after this woman who is this attorney goes through this horrible thing, right away it's going to be like kind of a stereotypical revenge movie where she's going to go out and get a gun or like go find these guys and track them down and like massacre them all or something like that. Like I felt like, okay, there's going to be a build up, a setup, and it's essentially going to be just a hardcore, grindhouse revenge tale kind of thing. But it wasn't that at all. Like it wasn't that at all. And it went and so when it got to that point where I thought it was going to go into like that classic kind of revenge story, it went into a totally different section or area, and it just continued to, for me as a viewer, it just continued to draw me in, and I was like, it was kind of messing with my expectations as to where this was going, and it wasn't that kind of a movie at all. Even the end, even though the end is like completely bonkers and crazy and insane and violent and just like um, totally sick, it still wasn't that, and that's the thing that I loved about this movie. It was like really original, and again, like hearing it compared to House on the Left, which is I did a show on that, which I think is one of the greatest horror exploitation movies ever made by, directed by Wes Craven, his first movie. I did a show on that. There's definitely similarities with that in this film, because that came out quite a few years before, and I'm sure that was a big influence on this. But this is entirely, uh, as a whole, as a movie, it's completely its own thing. It's like it definitely was inspired by that, but it's so utterly not a copycat of that. It's totally original. I thought it reminded me also of Straw Dogs, like I mentioned a few minutes ago. But yet again, it's totally goes into this whole other thing around the story and these characters, and it doesn't go into an area where you're like, okay, this is where it turns into a revenge movie. It wasn't that at all. Like, and it was like it messed with my expectations, and it really took me on a ride. And then the payoff was just like, holy shit, amazing! One of the best movies I've seen this year. I mean, probably the best movie I've seen this year. Like, this movie is just crazy, and it's so well done. Like, I think people who are not into exploitation movies per se, they're into maybe more highbrow films that have, like, higher caliber. They have, maybe they like films that where there's maybe more well known actors or more experienced actors or bigger budgets. But I think this film crosses that boundary where it can appeal to those people too. Granted, the violence in this movie is just like completely insane, so that might turn people off, but highly controversial. But just so great. It's like a highbrow exploitation movie. I don't know how else to describe it, but amazing film, amazing find. Mondo Macabre is the label. Like, they put out the best shit around. Everything I've gotten from them has just been stellar. And there's an amazing interview which I started to watch last night. I got through most of it last night with Jorge Grovav, the director. Super interesting, and it's like a 48-minute interview just with him, and he talks about all his entire career, and then talks extensively about Hunting Ground. Really awesome interview, super interesting, but phenomenal movie. Mondo Macabre, the best. I think it's the best. Just like it says on their label, the wild side of world cinema. That's exactly what they deliver. They totally specialize in all of these totally obscure, boundary pushing exploitation movies, and the amount of variety that they cover. Like I said, they cover films that like are sex exploitation movies. They cover psychosexual films, films that deal with those kinds of ideas, the horror exploitation world, the serial killer world, movies that have a more of a supernatural horror element. They also explore films that have a very much a giallo influence, or straight up giallo films. The level of diversity that this label has is just astounding, and just amazing. Yeah, Mondo Macabre. So thanks again. I highly recommend seeing this film because it is truly an amazing movie. And now I gotta check out more of these films by Jorge Gora. Amazing. I mean, amazing. Uh, so thanks again. If you like this channel, please like and subscribe to it, and we will see you next time. Peace.